Black July. Black July 1983 anti-Tamil riots in Sri Lanka. Black July is the common name used to refer to the anti-Tamil pogrom that occurred in Sri Lanka during July 1983. The pogrom was premeditated, and was finally triggered by a deadly ambush on the 23rd of July 1983, which caused the death of 13 Sri Lanka Army soldiers, by the Tamil militant group Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, LTTE. Although initially orchestrated by members of the ruling UNP, the pogrom soon escalated into spontaneous mass violence with significant public participation. Location, date. Black July part of riots in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan Civil War. A Tamil youth stripped naked before being kicked and killed by Sinhalese rioters near Borella bus stand. Location of Sri Lanka. Location Sri Lanka. Date the 24th of July 1983 to the 30th of July 1983, UTC+6. Target primarily Sri Lankan Tamils. Attack type: burning, decapitation, stabbing, shooting, raping. Weapons: axes, guns, explosives, knives, sticks. Deaths 400-3,000, injured 25,000 plus victims Tamil civilians. Perpetrators Sinhalese mobs, UNP. To a degree Sri Lanka Armed Forces and Sri Lankan Police know of participants. Thousands. Motive: ethnic cleansing. On the night of the 24th of July 1983, anti-Tamil rioting started in the capital city of Colombo and then spread to other parts of the country. Over 7 days, mainly Sinhalese mobs attacked, burned, looted, and killed Tamil targets. Estimates of the death toll range between 403,000 and 150,000 people became homeless. Around 8,000 homes and 5,000 shops were destroyed. The economic cost of the riots was $300 million. Sri Lankan Tamils fled to other countries in the ensuing years, and a large number of Tamil youth joined militant groups. Black July is generally seen as the start of the Sri Lankan civil war between the Tamil militants and the government of Sri Lanka. July became a period of remembrance for the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora community around the world. Background: main article, Origins of the Sri Lankan Civil War during the colonial period. Many Sri Lankan Tamils, particularly those from the Jaffna Peninsula, benefited greatly from educational facilities established by American missionaries. As a result, the colonial British recruited many English-speaking Tamils to the civil service and other professions on a merit basis. By 1956, 50% of clerical jobs were held by Tamils, although they were a minority of the country's population. Sinhalese leaders saw this imbalance as a problem that needed rectifying. In 1956, the Official Language Act, commonly known as the Sinhala Only Act, was introduced. Up until that time, English was the country's official language, despite being spoken by only 5% of the population. The use of Sinhala, spoken by 75%, and Tamil, spoken by 25%, had been severely restricted during the British colonial period. This new act replaced English with Sinhala as the nation's official language. Protests against the Sinhala-only policy by Tamils and by the nation's leftist parties were met with mob violence that eventually escalated into the riots of 1958. Political parties and groups representing Tamil Sri Lankans felt that the implementation of the Sinhala-only Act deprived the Tamil populations in the north and east of the country of their right to fully participate in government and as an injustice against ethnic minorities. In 1958, the Tamil political leadership acquiesced to a formula of Sinhala as the official language, but with a reasonable use of Tamil being allowed. Only the leftist parties opposed this, holding out for parity between the two languages. However, after the Tamil people gave an overwhelming mandate to the Tamil nationalist Ilankai Tamil Arasu Katchi Federal Party, which had agreed to a subordinate status for the Tamil language, the leftist parties eventually abandoned their support for parity. Throughout the 1960s, protests and state repression in response created further animosity. In 1972, the policy of standardization, which restricted Tamils' entry into universities, strained the already tenuous political relationship between the elites of the Tamil and Sinhalese communities. The quota affecting political representation became another cause for contention between Sinhalese and Tamil people. There was also a series of anti-Tamil pogroms in 1977, following the United National Party's, UNP, coming to power, which further increased hostility. In 1981, the renowned public library in Jaffna was burnt down by a violent Sinhalese mob. Until 1983, there were similar incidents of low-level violence between the government and the mushrooming Tamil militant groups. There were many murders, disappearances, and cases of torture attributed to the Sri Lankan security forces. Black July Saturday the 23rd of July. On the 23rd of July 1983 at around 11:30 p.m., the rebel liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, the Tamil Tigers or the LTTE, ambushed the 4-4 Bravo military patrol in Tirunelveli, near Jaffna in northern Sri Lanka. A roadside bomb was detonated beneath a jeep that was leading the convoy, injuring at least 2 soldiers on board. Soldiers traveling in the truck behind the jeep then dismounted to help their fellow soldiers. Subsequently, they were ambushed by a group of Tamil Tiger fighters who fired at them with automatic weapons and hurled grenades. In the ensuing clash, 1 officer and 12 soldiers were killed, with 2 more fatally wounded, for a total of 15 dead. A number of the rebels were also killed. Kittu, a regional commander of the LTTE, would later admit to planning and carrying out the ambush. This attack has been described as retaliation for the killing of one of the LTTE's founding members, Charles Anthony, by Sri Lankan forces and for the alleged abduction and rape of Tamil school girls by government forces. Sunday the 24th of July. In response to the ambush, truckloads of Sri Lankan soldiers left the Palali camp, smashing all the shops on the way to Tirunelveli. 51 Tamil civilians in Jaffna were subsequently massacred by the rampaging army in revenge. The army, including its commander, Tissa Weeratunga, decided that the soldiers' funerals shouldn't be held in Jaffna because of the high likelihood of disturbances at multiple locations. The decision was made to hold the funerals, with full military honors, at Connaught Cemetery, Colombo's main burial ground, instead. Prime Minister Ranasinghe Premadasa, fearing violence, was against holding the funeral in Colombo, but was overruled by President J.R. Jayawardena. The President, the Prime Minister, and the rest of the cabinet were to attend the funeral, which was to take place at 5 p.m. on the 24th of July. This arrangement went against the standard procedure of handing over fallen soldiers to their families for burial in their home villages. Preparations were made for the funeral, including putting the riot squad at the police station in nearby Borella on standby, but by 5 p.m. the bodies hadn't arrived in Colombo. The soldiers' families wanted the bodies handed over to them and to be buried according to tradition. Due to procedural issues, the bodies were still at Palali Army Camp near Jaffna. The bodies were eventually moved from Palali Air Force Base shortly after 6 p.m. Whilst this was occurring, tensions were growing at Colombo General Cemetery because of the delay. A large crowd, including around 3,000 people from the Wanathamala slum, started gathering at the cemetery, angered by news of the ambush, which was magnified by wild rumor. The Avro plane carrying the bodies arrived at Ratmalana Airport at 7:20 p.m., by which time the crowd at the cemetery had swollen to more than 8,000. The crowd wanted the bodies to be handed over to the families rather than to be buried at the cemetery. Violence broke out between the crowd and police, and the riot squad was summoned. The riot squad then fired tear gas at the crowd and baton charged them before handing control of the situation over to the army. The president then decided to cancel the military funeral and hand the bodies over to the families. The vehicles carrying the bodies had been driven away from Ratmalana at 8:30 p.m. and the drivers were heading to the cemetery. Due to the situation, the bodies were then diverted to army headquarters, so that they could be handed over to the families. The crowd at the cemetery was informed of the president's decision at around 10 p.m. The crowd left the cemetery in a restive mood. A section of the crowd marched up DS Senanayaka Mawatha to Borella, where they destroyed Tamil-owned Nagalingam stores. The mob, which by that time numbered around 10,000, attacked, looted, and set fire to any building near Borella Junction that had a Tamil connection, including Borella Flats and the Tamil Union Cricket and Athletic Club. Then houses belonging to Tamils in the neighborhood were targeted. The police fired tear gas at the crowd, but after exhausting all of their stock, they were then forced to fire their rifles into the air. The crowd then dispersed in the direction of Damatagoda, Maradana, Narahenpeta, Grand Pass, and Thimbarigasaya, where they attacked and looted Tamil properties and set them alight. Members of criminal gangs came to join the ensuing chaos. Monday the 25th of July, President Jayawardena convened the country's Security Council at the President's house, at 9:30 a.m. on the 25th of July. 100 yards away, the Bristol Building, and the Tamil-owned Amble Cafe, was ablaze. Also close by, on York Street, the Tamil-owned Clothier Sarathas was ablaze as well. Soon all the Tamil-owned shops on Bailey Street opposite the President's house were on fire. Every Tamil-owned business in the fort area was on fire by the time the Security Council meeting finished. The President ordered a curfew in Colombo from 6 p.m. The mob moved on to Olcott Mawatha, where they set fire to the Tamil-owned Ananda Bhawan food store, Rajaswari stores, and the Ajantha Hotel. The president's ministers were seen that morning in various parts of Colombo directing their thugs to attack Tamils and their properties. Cyril Matthew was seen in Colombo Fort, R. Premeditated trusted henchmen, mainly pavement hawkers, in Petar, Colombo Mayor's thugs and municipal labourers and Transport Minister M.H. Mohammed's men in Borella, District Minister Weerasinghe Malamarechi's thugs in Colombo North and Deputy Minister Anura Bastion's thugs in Colombo South. By 10 a.m., the rioting had spread to the slums of Canal Bank, Grand Pass, Hatawat, Kirilapone, Kotahena, Maradana, Modera, Mutwal, Narahenpeta, Slave Island, and Wanathamula. Mobs armed with crowbars and kitchen knives roamed the streets, attacking and killing Tamils. Welawata and Dehawala, which contained the largest number of Tamils in Colombo, were the next target of the mob. Homes and shops were attacked, looted, and destroyed. Tamil shops on Main Street and Bow Tree Junction were also attacked. The riots then spread to the middle-class residential areas of Anderson Flats, Elvatagala Flats, Torrington Flats, and Thimbarigasaya. Tamil targets in the exclusive Cinnamon Gardens were also attacked, as were those in the suburbs of Kadawatha, Kelaniya, New Jagoda, and Ratmalana. The residence of the Indian High Commissioner was also attacked and ransacked. By lunchtime, virtually the entire city was on fire. The curfew was advanced to 4 p.m. and then to 2 p.m., and it was extended to include Gampaha district, due to the violence spreading as far as Negombo. In Kalutara, the TKVS stores were set on fire. The owner jumped out of an upstairs window, but the mob threw him back into the fire. The curfew was then extended to Kalutara district. The police being unable, or unwilling, to enforce the curfew, the army was called in to assist the police. The rioters started to use voter registration lists to target Tamils. The possession of electoral lists by the mobs, which enabled them to identify Tamil homes and property, implied prior organization and cooperation by elements of the government. As President Jayawardena would later admit in a statement, a pattern of organization and planning has been noticed in the rioting and looting that took place. 81 out of the 92 Tamil-owned flats at Soiza Flats were attacked, looted, and set on fire. The mob attacked the industrial area of Ratmalana, which contained a number of Tamil-owned factories. Jetro Garments and Tata Garments on Gaul Road were completely gutted. Other factories attacked included Pons, Eslon, Reeves Garments, Hydo Garments, Hillut Garments, AGM Garments, Manhattan Garments, Ploypec, Barrett's, and Mascons Asbestos. Indian-owned factories such as Cundenmulls, Oxford, and Baxan Garments were not attacked, giving credence to the suggestion that the mob was deliberately going after Sri Lankan Tamil targets. 17 factories were destroyed in Ratmalana. Capital Maharaja, a Tamil-owned company, is one of Sri Lanka's largest conglomerates. 6 of their factories in Ratmalana and their headquarters in Bankshal Street were destroyed. The mob ended the day by setting fire to Tilly's Beach Hotel in Mount Lavinia. One of the most notorious incidents of the rioting took place at the Welakada prison on the 25th of July. 37 Tamil prisoners, most of them detained under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, were killed by Sinhalese prisoners using knives and clubs. Survivors claimed that prison officers allowed their keys to fall into the hands of Sinhalese prisoners, but at the subsequent inquest, prison officers claimed that the keys had been stolen from them. While a number of Tamils fled the city, many Sinhalese and Muslims saved the lives and properties of Tamils despite the activities of the gangs. Many Tamils were sheltered in government buildings, temples as well as Sinhalese and Muslim houses in the following days. Outside of the Western Province, there was violence in Gaul, Kigal, Trincomalee, and Vavuniya. Tuesday the 26th of July the mob attacks continued in Welawata and Dehawala on the 26th of July. There were 53 houses on Ratmakara Road. The 24 Tamil-owned, occupied houses were burnt. 3 houses had Sinhalese owners but were rented by Tamils. The mob removed the property from these 3 houses out to the road and burnt it. The 3 houses were not burnt down, neither were the 26 Sinhalese-owned, occupied houses. In many parts of the city, the army merely looked on as property was destroyed and people were killed. The violence spread to the country's second-largest city, Kandy, on the 26th of July. By 2:45 p.m. Delta Pharmacy on Peradeniya Road was on fire. Soon afterwards, a Tamil-owned shop near the Laxala building was set on fire, and the violence spread to Castle Street and Colombo Street. The police managed to get control of the situation, but an hour later a mob armed with petrol cans and Molotov cocktails started attacking Tamil shops on Castle, Colombo, Kings, and Trincomalee streets. The mob then moved on to nearby Gampola. A curfew was imposed in Kandy district on the evening of the 26th of July. In Trincomalee, false rumors started spreading that the LTTE had captured Jaffna, that the Karuinagar naval base had been destroyed, and that the Naga Vihara had been desecrated. Sailors based at Trincomalee Naval Base went on a rampage, attacking Central Road, Dockyard Road, Main Street, and North Coast Road. The sailors started 170 fires before returning to their base. The Sivan Hindu temple on Thirugnasambandan Road also was attacked. The curfew was extended nationwide on the 26th of July as a precautionary measure. There were more outbreaks of violence and looting against Tamils in areas where various ethnic groups had coexisted. By the evening of the 26th of July, the mob violence began to slacken as police and army units patrolled the streets in large numbers and began to take action against the rioters. The soldiers killed in the Thirunelveli ambush were quietly buried during the night curfew. Wednesday the 27th of July in the Central Province, the violence spread to Nawalapetia and Hatton. Badulla, the largest city in neighboring UVA province, had so far been peaceful, but around 10:30 am on the 27th of July, a Tamil-owned motorcycle was set on fire in front of the clock tower. Around midday an organized mob went through the city's bazaar area, setting shops on fire. The rioting then spread to residential areas, and the homes of many Tamils were burnt down. The mob then left the city in vans and buses that they had stolen and headed for Bandarawela, Haliella, and Wellamada, where they continued to set properties on fire. The riot had spread to Lunagala by nightfall. The daytime curfew in Colombo was lifted on the 27th of July, and the day began in relative calm. But then at Fort Railway Station, a train heading for Jaffna was stopped as it was pulling out of Platform 1 after cartridges were found on the track. Sinhalese passengers on the train started attacking Tamil passengers, killing 12. Some Tamils were burnt alive on the railway tracks. Following the riot at Welakada prison on the 25th of July, Tamil prisoners had been moved from the chapel ward to the youth offenders building. On the evening of the 27th of July, Sinhalese prisoners overpowered the guards, armed themselves with axes and firewood, and attacked those Tamil prisoners. 15 Tamil prisoners were killed. 2 Tamil prisoners and a third prisoner were killed during a riot at Jaffna prison on the same day. Thursday the 28th of July Badulla was still on fire on the 28th of July, and the rioting spread from Lunagala to Passara. There was also rioting in Nuwara Eliya and Chillor. But the violence had subsided in Colombo, Kandy, and Trincomalee. President Jayawardena and his cabinet met in an emergency session on the 28th of July. Jayawardena then made a primetime televised address in which he appealed for an end to the violence. Jayawardena blamed the violence on the deep ill feeling and suspicion that has grown between the Sinhalese and the Tamil people, caused by the calls for an independent Tamil state that began in 1976, when the Tamil United Liberation Front, the largest political party representing the Tamils, had passed the Vadakodai resolution. He blamed the violence committed by the Tamil militants for the way the Sinhalese people themselves have reacted. Jayawardena vowed that the Sinhalese people will never agree to the division of a country which has been a united nation for 2,500 years, and announced that the government would accede to the clamour of the Sinhalese people and ban any party which sought to divide the nation. Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi called Jayawardena on the 28th of July and informed him of the impact the riots had had in India. She requested that Jayawardena receive Minister of External Affairs P.V. Narasimha Rao as her special envoy. Jayawardena accepted, and a few hours later Rao arrived in Sri Lanka. Friday the 29th of July Colombo was still calm on the 29th of July. Tamil residents visited friends and relatives who had taken refuge in the many refugee camps in the city. Around 10:30 am 2 Sinhalese youths were shot on Gasworks Street. A large crowd gathered at the scene, and soon rumours started circling that the youths had been shot by Tamil tigers from the Adam Ali building. The building was surrounded by the army, navy, and police who proceeded to fire at the building using submachine guns and semi-automatic rifles. A helicopter also fired at the building with a machine gun. The security forces stormed the building but found no Tamil tigers, weapons, or ammunition inside. However, rumors began to spread around Colombo that the army was engaged in a battle with the Tamil tigers. Panicking workers began to flee in any mode of transport they could find. Mobs started gathering in the streets, armed with axes, bricks, crowbars, iron rods, kitchen knives, and stones, ready to fight the tigers. The tigers never came, so the mobs turned their attention to the fleeing workers. Vehicles were stopped and searched for Tamils. Any Tamil they found was attacked and set on fire. A Tamil was burnt alive on Kerala Road. 11 Tamils were burnt alive on Atadia Road. The police found an abandoned van, on the same road, that contained the butchered bodies of 2 Tamils and 3 Muslims. Police shot dead 15 rioters. At 2 p.m. on the 29th of July, a curfew came into force which lasted until 5 a.m. on Monday the 1st of August. Badulla, Kandy, and Trincomalee were calm on the 29th of July, but there was violence in Nuwara Eliya, beginning around midday. The Tamil-owned Gainson and Sivalingam stores were attacked and set on fire. The violence then spread to Bazaar Street and Lawson Road. Violence was also reported in Kagal district and Matara district. In Kagal district the violence spread from Dehiowita to Diranyagala to Avasawala. In Matara district the worst affected areas were Deniyaya and Morawake. There was violence in Chilor as well. Indian External Affairs Minister Rao held discussions with President Jayawardena and Foreign Minister ACS Hamid before visiting Kandy by helicopter. Saturday the 30th of July violence was reported in Nuwara Eliya, Kandapola, Howrah Eliya, and Matale on the 30th of July. The rest of the country was quiet. That night the government banned 3 left-wing political parties, the Communist Party of Sri Lanka, Janatha Vimukthi Peramuna, and the Navasama Samaja Party, blaming them for inciting the riots. A few leaders of other groups were arrested, as well. Government response. See also: Human rights in Sri Lanka and state terrorism in Sri Lanka. There had been growing tension between the Sinhalese and Tamil communities of Sri Lanka before the actual riots began. With the formation of rebel Tamil groups, there rose an anti-Tamil sentiment among the Sinhalese majority. Although the violence was first started by Sinhalese mobs who had gathered at the Colombo cemetery where the bodies of the soldiers were to be buried, they were later joined by elements associated with Sinhalese political activists involved in the organization of the riots. During the early stages of the riots, it is alleged that the local police and military stood by and did nothing, or even assisted the mobs. Numerous eyewitness accounts suggest that, in many places, police and even military personnel joined the rioters. However, by the 26th of July the police and army were out in the streets taking some action against the mobs. The government extended the curfew to prevent violence from spreading to other parts of the country. A brief spate of rioting broke out on the 29th of July, when police shot and killed 15 Sinhalese looters. The Sri Lankan government was accused from various corners of being complicit during the pogrom and of supporting and encouraging the Sinhalese mobs. President Jayawardena has been accused of failing to condemn the violence or to express sympathy to the survivors, blaming Tamils for bringing it upon themselves, failing to take any meaningful measures to punish the perpetrators of the violence, and praising the mobs as heroes of the Sinhalese people. In an interview with the Daily Telegraph on the 11th of July 1983, about 2 weeks prior to the riots, Jayawardena expressed the state's complicity in the violence against the Tamils. "I am not worried about the opinion of the Jaffna, Tamil, people now. Now we cannot think of them. Not about their lives or of their opinion about us. The more you put pressure in the north, the happier the Sinhala people will be here. Really, if I starve the Tamils, Sinhala people will be happy." Even though some Tamil politicians accused the ruling UNP of not taking appropriate actions to prevent the riots, the government was adamant that it did take vital countermeasures from the very early stages to combat rioters and to safeguard the Tamil community. Curfew was enforced immediately after the riots broke out. The attacks, according to the government, were carefully organized, and government properties such as trains, buildings, and buses were the initial targets. Prime Minister Premadasa formed a committee to organize shelter for, and feeding of, an estimated 20,000 homeless Tamils in Colombo. These temporary shelters were situated at 5 school buildings and an aircraft hangar. After the number of refugees increased to around 50,000, the government, with help from India, took measures to transport Tamils north on ships. Eyewitness accounts: mobs armed with petrol were seen stopping passing motorists at critical street junctions. After ascertaining the ethnic identity of the driver and passengers, they set alight the vehicles, with the drivers and passengers trapped inside. Mobs were also seen stopping buses to identify Tamil passengers, who were subsequently knifed, clubbed to death, or burned alive. One Norwegian tourist saw a mob set fire to a minibus with 20 people inside, killing them all. According to eyewitness testimony of a victim who survived the riots, Buddhist monks were among the rioters. The Tamil Guardian lists more eyewitness testimonies from various sources. London's The Daily Telegraph, July 26, wrote, Motorists were dragged from their cars to be stoned and beaten with sticks. Others were cut down with knives and axes. Mobs of Sinhala youth rampaged through the streets, ransacking homes, shops and offices, looting them and setting them ablaze, as they sought out members of the Tamil ethnic minority. A mob attacked a Tamil cyclist riding near Colombo's eye hospital. The cyclist was hauled from his bike, drenched with petrol and set alight. As he ran screaming down the street, the mob set on him again and hacked him down with jungle knives. In his book, The Tragedy of Sri Lanka, William McGowan wrote, "While traveling on a bus when a mob laid siege to it, passengers watched as a small boy was hacked, to limbless death. The bus driver was ordered to give up a Tamil. He pointed out a woman who was desperately trying to erase the mark on her forehead, called a kumkum, as the thugs bore down on her. The woman's belly was ripped open with a broken bottle and she was immolated as people clapped and danced." In another incident, two sisters, one 18 and one 11, were decapitated and raped, the latter, until there was nothing left to violate and no volunteers could come forward, after which she was burned. While all this was going on, a line of Buddhist monks appeared, arms flailing, their voices raised in a delirium of exhortation, summoning the Sinhalese to put all Tamils to death. The London Daily Express, the 29th of July, wrote, "Mrs. Eli Skarstein, back home in Stavanger, Norway, told how she and her 15-year-old daughter, Kristen, witnessed one massacre. A minibus full of Tamils were forced to stop in front of us in Colombo," she said. A Sinhalese mob poured petrol over the bus and set it on fire. They blocked the car door and prevented the Tamils from leaving the vehicle. Hundreds of spectators watched as about 20 Tamils were burnt to death. Mrs. Skarstein added, "We can't believe the official casualty figures. Hundreds, maybe thousands, must have been killed already." The police force, which is 95% Sinhalese, did nothing to stop the mobs. There was no mercy. Women, children and old people were slaughtered. Police did nothing to stop the genocide. The Times of London reported on the 5th of August that Army personnel actively encouraged arson and the looting of Tamil business establishments and homes in Colombo, and that absolutely no action was taken to apprehend or prevent the criminal elements involved in these activities. In many instances, Army personnel participated in the looting of shops. The Economist of the 6th of August wrote, "But for days the soldiers and policemen were not overwhelmed. They were unengaged or, in some cases, apparently abetting the attackers. Numerous eyewitnesses attest that soldiers and policemen stood by while Colombo burned." Paul Seagate of the International Commission of Jurists stated in Sri Lanka, A Mounting Tragedy of Errors, 2 months after the riots, that clearly this, July 1983 attack, was no spontaneous upsurge of communal hatred among the Sinhala people, nor was it, as has been suggested in some quarters, a popular response to the killing of 13 soldiers in an ambush the previous day by Tamil tigers, which was not even reported in the newspapers until the riots began. It was a series of deliberate acts, executed in accordance with a concerted plan, conceived and organized well in advance. Casualty estimates. The estimates of casualties vary. While the government initially stated just 250 Tamils were killed, various NGOs and international agencies estimate that between 400 and 3,000 people, believed to be Sri Lankan Tamils or Hill Country Tamils, were killed in the riots. 53 political prisoners alone were killed in the Welakade prison massacre. Eventually, the Sri Lankan government put the death toll at about 300 dead. More than 18,000 houses and numerous commercial establishments were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands of Tamils fled the country to Europe, Australia and Canada. Many Tamil youths also joined the various Tamil groups, including the Tamil Tigers. Citation needed. Sexual violence. Countless Tamil women were raped with impunity during the pogrom, including the following accounts. Indian journalist Anita Pratap reported in The Telegraph that Sinhala gangs armed with voters' lists came in empty trucks before they systematically looted Tamil homes. They had prior knowledge not only of where the Tamils lived, but also a list of Tamil belongings. Pratap narrated the experience of an Indian victim, Trilok Singh, who lived in a first-floor apartment with her husband in Colombo. Singh heard people breaking into the apartment below, where a 60-year-old Tamil woman lived. Her furniture was stolen and she was raped. Yogi Yogaratnam, a young store worker in Colombo, was forced to watch the gang rape of his mother by a Sinhala gang, who hit him and his mother every time he tried to close his eyes. His mother was then killed and Yogi was told, "This is what Tamil whores deserve." He subsequently joined the LTTE and became a political leader in the organization. On the 25th of July 1983, around 1:30 p.m., a Tamil survivor witnessed the gang rape and killing of two Tamil sisters, aged 18 and 11, by a Sinhala mob. The elder sister went on her knees and begged them not to harm her 11-year-old sister, who was then hacked to death in front of the 18-year-old with derisive laughter from the mob. The elder sister was then gang raped by about 20 Sinhala men before being burnt alive. The witness also reported seeing several naked Tamil rape victims in a Colombo refugee camp who had been stripped of their clothes on the streets and were being ogled at by Sri Lankan soldiers. In a letter addressed to President J.R. Jayawardena, the leader of the main Tamil party, Amirthalingam stated having a sworn affidavit from one Velu Subramanian, a labourer of Thachankalam, Vavuniya district. Subramanian stated that his wife was gang raped by two Sinhala Air Force men on the night of the 30th of July, and that they had wanted his daughter to be made available to them the next day. Prosecutions and compensations. A presidential commission appointed during the subsequent People's Alliance government estimated that nearly 300 people were killed and 18,000 establishments, including houses, were destroyed. The commission recommended that restitution be paid. Thus far no restitution has been paid nor have any criminal proceedings begun against anyone involved. Remembrance July has become a time of mourning and remembrance amongst the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora around the world, which comes together to commemorate the loss of Tamils. This has happened in countries such as Canada, Switzerland, Norway, Denmark, Germany, France, Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Panorama of the Black July's 26th anniversary Remembrance Day observed at Trafalgar Square in London in 2009.